It's the voice. I'm Ben Rockwood. I am coming to you from Bainbridge Island. This is episode 48, and once again, we're going behind the curtain, and I am going to show you how the book looks. Ben Rockwood is joining the show again to explain how the book business actually works from the inside of a small press looking out. This is a conversation that starts with the shape of the industry, what the big five are, how their imprints operate, where the hybrid publishers sit in relation to them. And this is something that we have found. Maybe a lot of you are well aware of how the book industry works, but when you're a poet and you're just sending your work out into the void, you have an idea of who is reading your work in the void, and that isn't how I have seen it. And so, anyways, I'm going to hand this off to Ben, and he's going to explain the book industry and the shape of the industry and kind of demystify some things so that when writers, especially, are setting their work out, they know what it looks like and how things work a little bit better. This will give you a better idea of why you get rejection letters. 9 times out of 10, it's not your work. Sometimes it is, because, all of us, we have one where we're like, I could have done better. But we get 1,000 submissions a month. That's a lot of rejection letters. And so when you think about just the number, that's most of it. Anyways, I'll let Ben explain more, and then we'll move on, and we'll understand how this works and how we can work together, and we'll feel a little bit better about ourselves. Okay, off to Ben.
Hello, Ben Rockwood here with you again, Bainbridge Island Press COO and designer. I'm here to share a little bit with you about the book industry. The understanding the book industry can be complicated. It's a difficult and bizarre landscape, and each of us have our sort of different views into it. And I wanted to, based on our experience as a publisher and interacting with the different sort of layers, bring to you a better, or shall we say different, way of approaching the different layers of the book industry using something of a multi-dimensional approach. I want to look at each of the different layers in terms of understanding their function and understanding what their incentives, biases, and constraints are, so that we can better understand what each layer is doing, what their primary concerns are, and help you maybe wrap your head a little better around why they're acting in the way in which they're acting. So, as I go through, I want to start off by setting a ground rule and establish some norms here, and to say that, number one, I am assuming positive intent at every turn. There are bad players, there are selfish people, there are people who are just in it for the money, but that is absolutely not the norm. It's more of an outlier. So we're just going to sort of assume at each layer positive intent. The other is that every person involved in the book industry, in one way or another, each person's interactions could be different, but everyone in the book industry is in it because of their love of books. Like I said, one way or another, they love books. And actually, that right there creates a lot of the friction, I think, and perhaps inequity that happens inside of the book industry. A lot of people are underpaid. Margins in publishing and books in general are pretty thin. And so whether it's an underpaid person working in a bookstore, or it's an underpaid editor, or somebody working desperately to work their way up in a big house, almost everyone's being underpaid. And a lot of that actually comes out of this, we do it for the books. We do it for the love of books. And if you're in this for the money, that's the wrong reason. You should be in this for the love of books. And so the love of books both fuels all of our efforts, every single sort of layer in the book industry, but it also does certainly get taken advantage of, I think, in a lot of ways. But again, we're going to assume positive intent here and leave that to the side. But it's an important thing that paints over, I think, everything in one way or another. Okay, so let's talk about the layers. We're going to start at the beginning. And the beginning is the author. The author has an idea. They have something that they want to say. They're going to put letters on a page, and they're going to build a manuscript, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, poetry, essays. One way or another, a human being is going to have an idea in their brain. It's going to go through their fingers, and it's going to go onto a virtual page, a page of one form or another, which is going to ultimately culminate in a manuscript. Different types of authors in different genres will enter, shall we say, the book industry at different levels. So, for instance, in poetry, normally when you approach a poetry publisher such as ourselves, your manuscript is done. When we go through the editing process is refining. We might ask you to add a couple of things or remove a couple of things, but we're working with a manuscript that's done. We're molding the clay, as it were, of a finished piece. When you look at the stories, the popular stories that movies are made of and whatnot about sort of, the rise to fame or of, nonfiction or particularly fiction prose, then you'll actually have cases where authors are coming to publishers or agents with something that is started. The idea is done. There's maybe a couple chapters. Then they're going to engage with a publishing contract of one form or another. And then they're going to, maybe get an advance on something that's not even complete. And then they're going to work through with the developmental editor to turn that into the final finished project. And that can take, in some cases, years, right? Think about like David Foster Wallace, for instance, got, an advance on Infinite Jest when it was very, very, I don't recall exactly how young, but it was very young, and he didn't actually produce the book for several years. There's lots of stories out there like that. For most people, though, that's not the path. Normally, you have a manuscript that's done or near done. The incentives of an author, the idea is fame, fortune, appreciation, validation. There are definite biases in the mind of an author. Of course, you are the most important author. Your work is amazing. And I think sometimes the hubris of an author gets maybe a bad rap. If you don't believe it's the best book, or the best manuscript, then why are you working on it? Obviously, you have to have a huge amount of pride in your work, and that's a good thing. If you don't have that pride, then nothing else is going to get built on top of that foundation. But the constraints, obviously, of an author are that you require partners. A book is only a book once it's made into a book, and it's put into a place where a reader can get it. So there's some, constraints that you need partners. And this is where the book industry comes in. We'll touch quickly on the agent. Most authors don't ever have an agent. Agents are out there. They are real. One of the places you see agents the most is interacting with the big five houses. We're going to talk about those in a minute, but big five houses, the big publishers will not talk directly to authors, or rather they won't take submissions directly from authors. They rely on agents to weed things out and to sort of, do that early acquisitions work of finding the work that they're going to want, so that the process is kind of pretty well along by the time it actually gets to them. So agents are sort of a screening layer, but the incentive of an agent is to find an incredible author with an incredible book, to get that into the hands of the best possible, publisher they can, and ultimately they're going to take a cut of whatever your royalty is, generally a fairly significant cut. And so they're incentivized to find the best possible work, get it connected with the best possible publisher. And of course, they have certain biases. A lot of those biases are going to be based on the genre that they're in or the houses that they're working with. The agents know the editors who are acquiring at a variety of different publishing houses. And so their biases are generally based on their experience and who they're working with, so that they can better align the work that they see with the best place that it can go. And their constraints is there's only, they can only work with what they know. And so, agents get slammed all the time, which means they're always sort of overlooking some work that might be incredible. And they're looking to sort of win their reputation over time in aggregate. So they don't need every book to be a massive success, but if they don't have a certain sort of batting average, then they're not going to continue to be a successful agent. Let's go up the layer to the publisher. So the publisher is responsible for turning a manuscript into a book, fundamentally. This is where sort of the raw ingredients get turned into a finished product. And there are a couple of different types of publishers that are out there today. Each of them have their own incentives, biases, and constraints. So we start off with self-publishing. Obviously, this is you. It's all DIY. You're going to do the interior. You're going to do the cover. You're going to work with someone to get it printed. There are a lot of different venues and avenues for having this done these days. So, the incentive there is of course that you have total control over what you're doing. You're going to get, the full royalty minus what's taken out by whoever's, producing the book for you. And, the biases though are going to be whatever you bring. The way that you approach the book, the way that you think it should be done is going to be based on your experience, which may be, extensive. It may be very limited. And you're going to do the best thing you can based on what you've experienced. And so that has a lot of constraints that come with it, right? You aren't a professional designer, probably. You aren't familiar with the norms of the industry, or if you are, it's based on what you've observed rather than direct interaction. So you can come up to the next layer of publishers, which is the hybrid or vanity press. These are publishers. It's almost weird to call them publishers. They are publishers, but they're going to take a fee. So rather than being directly invested in the outcome of your book, they're very invested in the income of your book, meaning that their incentive is to get authors to come in, take advantage of their services, pay as much as possible for those services, to produce a book that you'll like. They want to make you happy as an author producing a book, and whether or not it sells is inconsequential to them. They may have a deal where they get a certain, they take a certain amount of the royalty, on each book sold. Some do, some don't. There's a lot of different variation in that space, but they really just want to make sure that you're happy, that you have a book, and that you're excited with the outcome. And then what happens after that is entirely up to you. So naturally, there's some constraints there, because they just have sort of only so much control over the process, and they're not concerned about the long-term outcome. Then you come up to the indie publishers. Now, the indie publishers right now are defined as essentially anyone other than the big five. So this is also what's being kind of flagrantly called trad pub, traditional publishing. We are a indie pub. As a small press, each of us are trying to distinguish ourselves in our respective space as having a distinct style, a quality of book that we produce, a quality of story authors that we produce, quality of the actual sort of artifact. We're very interested in making sure that everything that we're finding great authors, that we're taking those and turning them into the best possible book that we can, and that we're getting it into as many places as possible for people to see and experience that book. And traditional publishers like us are of the people in the industry. I think we're the ones that are sort of at the center, and we're the most deeply. We're the ones who are concerned about your book on a daily basis. Like every day, we're thinking about every book in our catalog and what we can be doing for it, and frustrated that it's not doing better than it could be, or excited that it's taken off. We're thinking about that book every single day, and so our incentive is to find the greatest possible authors that are going to match our style, that we can get those books out. And sell as many books as possible for ourselves and for the author. We want to build, prestige for our house and for what we're doing. We have probably the fewest number of constraints. The biggest constraint really for us is going to be our ability to find great authors with great manuscripts, and the amount of time and money we have to invest in each project. So, the bigger houses are going to have, more staff, more people, they can do more books, and they have to make a sort of decision. And this is something that's often discussed among traditional publishers is, do you do more books but spend less time on them, or do you do fewer books but spend more time on them? And what does that ultimately mean in terms of sales support and giving the best experience you can to your authors and to your readers? And there's a lot of back and forth on that. But obviously our bias is that we want to produce the best possible books in the world, and we believe deeply in our authors, we believe deeply in our books. And we're very excited about everything that we produce and connecting all those dots. And that brings us to the big five. So the big five houses, if you haven't heard the list recently, the big five houses are Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Hachette, and Simon & Schuster. Those are the biggest publishing houses in the world. Largely, all of them have, prestigious histories in and of themselves, but they've also been great consolidators, which is why they're sort of the big five. When a smaller press becomes, highly successful, normally one of the big five houses is going to look at it and decide whether or not they want to bring it in and add it to their portfolio, which is why these are giant, massive multinational corporations now. The big houses are very concerned about hitting big. There's been a lot of different studies out there about how much they're selling and what their numbers look like. There's a system that's out there for book publishing called BookScan. BookScan previously was owned by Nelson. Now it's been moved over to another company that most people have never heard of. But BookScan is equivalently like the Nelson ratings of book sales, similar to like what you have like, Billboard charts, or you have, Nelson ratings for television back when that was a thing. And they're tracking book sales all across the industry. Now, it's only print sales. It does not include ebook sales or audiobooks. So that often puts something of a taint on BookScan figures, but it's sort of the best thing that the industry has. According to numbers that we've seen, verifiable numbers out of BookScan, less than 30% of books from the big five sell more than 1,000 copies in the first year, which is a lot lower than most people think. The big five houses, what they want to do is they want to hit the home runs. And so if you think about this like with a baseball sort of analogy, a good batting average is 300 is a very good batting average, right? You only need to hit the ball every 3 out of 10 times that you come up to the plate, and you're considered like a really amazing hitter. Similar to that, the big five houses, they're not concerned about having a whole bunch of books that sell 10,000 copies each. They're really looking at the big books that sell millions of copies, right? As a result, that's their incentive is to find the big wins. But as a result, they come in with a lot of constraints and a lot of biases. This is why they rely entirely on agents to do sort of all that pre-screening. And they're focused so narrowly, they often overlook things. Everyone loves the stories of how, like, J.K. Rowling got turned down, dozens of times with Harry Potter before she got a deal. When you're the first, particularly when you're the first, and J.K. Rowling really, had a big hand in the ultimate domination of YA as a genre, and establishing that really strongly. This is not what the agents weren't looking for, that kind of material. So they were looking over the top of her stuff. And it wasn't until she finally got to the right person that they were able to take things forward. And then, of course, everything sort of took off. Once that happened, all of a sudden the biases in the industry changed, right? And all of a sudden, all the agents were now looking for the next big YA author, and we became flooded. And this is why we see these sort of patterns that happen in the industry over time, is these biases are based on what's working now or in the recent future, and they're projecting that forward. So they're constantly fighting their own biases. And their constraints really are about, they are definitely focused on the numbers in a big way. So they've got to make big numbers, and as a result, that's why they're willing to miss a lot of take a lot of misses on the hits. I think I'm too tired of the baseball analogy now, because they're so concerned about hitting those big home runs. Now, one of the reasons that this is an interesting and important thing to know about the Big Fives is there's questions about, like, how do they feel about self-publishing? How do they feel about hybrid or indie presses? They actually don't care about us at all. And the reason actually is sort of positive. Remember, we're going with positive intent here. They're happy for you to go out and self-publish your book. And if it's a huge success, guess what? An agent's got to swoop in, talk to you, and the Big Five want to publish your next book, right? But they don't necessarily need to take a chance on you. And so all these different avenues for publishing now are actually fantastic for the Big Five, because you can actually test the waters in the market for them so that they can get in on it later and profit from it, because that's a bunch of data that suggests that you're a good route to go. As a result, sort of all these different layers of publishers, self-publishing, hybrid, indie, and Big Five, in some sense all work together. We're working at different layers within the industry, and some people, I think, maybe see them as being in conflict with each other. I really don't think that they are. If you want a lot of control over what you're doing, definitely go, the self-publishing route. If you want a partner and you want to produce something in collaboration that's going to turn out hopefully to be something, really unique and powerful, work with an indie publisher. If you just want to sell a huge ton of books, maybe go with a hybrid, get a high quality book from a hybrid, get that published out, and then use that as a way to, capture the eye of an agent who's going to get you into a Big Five house. There's a lot of synergy that sort of works, and it's not nearly as competitive or contentious as some people might think. Then we go down now once we get out of publishing is the sort of the big cosmic center of the book universe. But once we get down below that, we have printers. Printers are obviously trying to print as many books as they possibly can, and they want to do that with the highest margins possible. So printers generally want to do large runs of books. The most difficult part of printing a book is what's called make ready. It's the setup of the presses for the book. That, depending on the method that you use for printing, can be time consuming. And so the more copies of your book they print, the lower the cost of that book is going to be. And it's advantageous for them. Their constraints are considerably different, and that they could care less what's on the page, just so long as you order a lot of them. Whether or not they sell is not of interest to them, so long as you keep buying books, regardless of where they're going. Then you go up to the distributors. Distributors want to connect with publishers that are pushing lots of books. They want to be able to go to their customers who are booksellers, and be able to have the widest possible selection of books that are going to meet the needs of the bookseller. And if you think about most bookstores, I mean, think about all the different sort of genres. You got to have every genre in that bookstore. You got to have children's books. You got to have philosophy books. You got to have, theology or religion books. You need to have cookbooks. You need to have sci-fi. You need to have the new bestsellers. So as a distributor, your incentive is to have as many different options available in all those sort of areas so that you can fulfill the needs of booksellers and book buyers in one place. And the more that you can have, under your roof, the better that you can do. Now, their bias, though, of course, is that they're really only interested in things that are going to pad out their portfolio and that are going to really connect and resonate with booksellers, right? They don't want a lot of dead weight, or they want as little dead weight as possible. And they're very interested in sort of the name. So the more established the publisher is, the more established the authors are under that, the better it is for them, because it's easier for them to sell books. And every distributor wants to be the one distributor that booksellers need, right? They prefer that, the booksellers aren't buying from a variety of distributors. I mean, they are, but obviously the more that's under your house, the better. And their constraints are just sort of what's available, what the trends are, and what the publishers are providing to them as a distributor. Then we come up the layer to the bookseller. The bookseller, of course, is their incentive is to have the widest possible selection of books in whatever format the bookstore is going. So widest variety, meaning that, like, if you're a romantasy shop, where we're seeing a lot of these pop-up romantasy bookshops out there, when you go in there, they have different genres of fantasy, history, but these are not books about World War II. These are romantasy books that are historical, or they're fantasy romantasy or what. So they want to be able to provide to their target customer the best possible selection of things that those customers are interested in and that are going to draw the most attention. And they would prefer that book buyers come into the bookstore already knowing what they want, rather than coming in and having to browse to find, right? The way that you approach that, are people coming in to get the book they want, or are they browsing, right? In one case, say, cover design is not a concern because they're going to buy the book either way. In another, you want a really attractive looking book that's going to catch an eye and is going to draw on the reader, because then they'll maybe pick it up off the shelf and read it. And so their constraints, of course, are that they're working with what's available through the distributors. They're working with what the readers expect, and what their readers expecting may be changing. And of course, there's a huge diversity based on where that bookstore is, the time of season, and their specialty. Libraries. Libraries are an important layer here as well. Their big concern generally is with funding and meeting the needs of the patron of the library. So they want to have the largest possible selection available for their patrons, so that they can whatever they want or need is there. Sometimes very obscure, but they're also looking at the turnover of books within their collection. So a lot of libraries will age out books after, say, a year. If it hasn't been checked out more than once or twice, they'll put it on a list to have it removed. Different libraries have different policies, and not all are very transparent about what those policies are. I've reached out to them, and there's no hard, fast rules. Even if they have a policy that says, they remove a book from their library after 2 years with less than 4 checkouts, that's not always honored. It sort of depends. And that's where the librarians make decisions about, okay, maybe it's just a low volume book, it's like a mechanic's guide or something like that. It's still of value. So they are trying to balance a lot of different things, but their bias is certainly in favor of meeting the needs of their local community and patrons to meet their needs as they change over time, so that there's constant growth in the readership of the library. And then we can go to the last layer, the most important layer of the book industry, which is the reader and the book buyer. There are a lot of different reasons that readers go out and buy a certain book. It's maybe something they've heard about. Maybe it's something that their friends have mentioned. Maybe it's something that's simply popular and they want to check out. Maybe they're doing research. Maybe they're trying to learn. There's so many different sort of reasons that a reader can come to a book. But, there are definitely, biases that happen, right? We say don't judge a book by its cover, but you certainly do. A book is a very multi-layered object. Most books that are purchased, I mean, if you're really honest, don't ever get read, or they only get sort of skimmed very briefly before they're put on a shelf. And this is where a book goes from a transmission mechanism of information to or an entertainment device, and instead turns into an object, right? A lot of people just like being surrounded by books, even if they don't read them. And that's okay. But of course, the constraint of the reader that ultimately feeds back through this entire chain of all the different layers of the book industry is that there's only so much time, there's only so much money that they're going to spend on books. And so what is it that's going to, capture their attention and their excitement and their interest, right? And if you stand there in a bookstore and just say, look at a shelf, right? I do this with poetry sections. How many of those books that are not face out are you actually going to grab off the shelf? Like very few. I mean, in a lot of genres, a lot of all the books will have a similar sort of vibe, almost intentionally, right? There are sort of standards and conventions about, what is a poetry book like? What is a fantasy book like? What does a, bestseller look like? And we sort of follow those patterns. Then everything sort of ends up looking very similar on the shelf, and we're all competing for your eye and trying to open you up to something new that you might not have expected, that's not face out, that's not being pushed by the bookstore or the bookseller, is a real tough thing. And this is where every layer of the book industry is trying to find a way to connect with you as the reader, to make you interested in taking that book off the shelf rather than any of the others. And they're all doing it together. And so I'll leave with that. It's really interesting when you think about sort of all the different layers, all the ways in which they interact, and how each of them has their own incentives, biases, and constraints. There's a lot of great stuff out there if you're interested in these sorts of things. Jane Friedman is an incredible resource. She's a writer, does podcasts all the time. She's at AWP and all the big conferences. Microcosm has a really good podcast that's of interest to people who are interested in sort of the backside of the publishing industry. And a book I've been recently reading that's been really fascinating to look back at the history of things is called Nothing Random, which is about Bennett Cerf, prolific founder of Random House, which merged with Penguin. Now is Penguin Random House, written by Gail Feldman. It's a very interesting book. Boy, is it long. It's 1,000 pages. And it breaks down different, parts of his life and different struggles and different triumphs. And he was a very prolific sort of individual. But also, I think it gives you an interesting perspective on how things changed over time, right? Like in that book, you definitely see Simon & Schuster kind of got going about the same time as Bennett Cerf was, and you get to see alongside Random House the rise of Simon & Schuster and Harper and a bunch of these other presses that have come and gone over the years. So very interesting book. Anyway, I hope that was of some interest to you. It's always fun to look at the industry in a different way, and hopefully wherever you are in that big stack of the industry. Hopefully there's something in there that can help you appreciate the other layers in a way that maybe you hadn't before. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.
Okay, that's all, poetry friends. If you've enjoyed diving into the world of verse with us, please join us next time, where we've got more poets to meet, more poems to explore, more book industry to explore, and more literary adventures to share. So until then, keep reading, keep writing, and keep poetry close to your heart. Thank you for joining POETICS Podcast, where we bring poetry to life, one verse at a time.